U.S. Airlines getting nowhere fast. They promised more on-time flights and better service. So why are things getting worse? Get ready for the summertime browns. Power supplies are pushed to the limit. An ocean view now may mean trouble ahead. More of the coast will soon be clear. And a sharper focus on the risks of laser eye surgery.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather reporting from CBS News headquarters in New York.
Good evening. Surviving the summer of 2000. Tonight, more bad news about traveling by air and staying powered up on the ground. Both systems are stretched to the limit, and that's on top of high summer prices at the gasoline pump. First, about the airlines and their promises to improve service and cut delays. CBS's Bob Orr reports those promises fly in the face of the latest facts.
6 months after airlines promised passengers that air travel would get better, it seems to be getting worse. Complaints and delays are mounting, and flying, for the most part, remains a major hassle.
If they're making a big push on customer service, it comes as a surprise to me.
New numbers obtained by CBS News show that flight delays for the first 5 months of this year were up more than 11% over last year's record-setting pace, and up a whopping 76.5% over 1997.
Last week we were delayed by about an hour and a half. They never announced a reason.
His airline should have provided that information under a pledge made last December to meet customers' demands. Airlines sidestepped a crackdown by Congress by promising to improve baggage handling, access to low fares, communications about delays, and the treatment of passengers trapped for hours on delayed flights. But a new report from the Inspector General of the Department of Transportation says the airlines, while making some progress, still fall short. Information given to passengers about delays, the report says, is frequently inaccurate, incomplete, or unreliable. And airlines, the IG concludes, have a ways to go to restore customer confidence. But the airlines insist they're trying.
In spite of the numerous weather delays and air traffic control delays that we experience, we are still working very hard to provide our passengers with the very best possible flight available.
The fact is, improvements in customer service won't appease air travelers as long as delays continue at a record pace. And with the number of flights steadily increasing, it seems passenger frustration will only get worse. Bob Orr, CBS News, Washington.
If air travel's a hassle, traveling by car this summer is a pain in the wallet. As our CBS Price Watch reported last night, gasoline prices eased slightly in the past few days, but remain near historic highs, especially in the Midwest. And on Capitol Hill today, Energy Secretary Bill Richardson paid a price himself for being where the buck stops on fuel costs. CBS's John Roberts is on the Price Watch.
Under intense pressure for good news on gas prices, the Energy Secretary today proclaimed relief may be on the way.
Hopefully, and I said hopefully, we're turning a corner on gasoline prices.
But even as prices begin to drop, the political battle over who is responsible took center stage today on Capitol Hill.
The administration's laissez-faire approach has sent the clear signal to OPEC that price fixing is okay by us.
This Congress has been fiddling while Rome burns, and then has called the president an arsonist.
Republicans complain that the president has put off limits to domestic oil fields that could reduce our dependence on foreign crude. The White House counters that Republicans have rebuffed every program the president has put forward to reduce America's appetite for oil.
With the Republican-led Congress, we've met a brick wall.
Energy analysts believe neither side has done enough.
Well, we're in a big predicament, and sadly, there's a lot of blame to go around. The reality is, in our current energy scene, OPEC is back in the driver's seat, and Congress gave them the keys.
The vice president seized on this potent issue today, unveiling his proposal to get that key back. A $75 billion plan of tax incentives to promote fuel efficiency and alternative energy sources.
We are Americans. We should plan ahead so that we can do what we have always taken as a right, to turn on our engines and get where we want to go with nobody's permission.
Governor Bush today dismissed the vice president's plans as recycled proposals that would do little to reduce America's dependence on foreign oil. And even with the price of a gallon of gas now hovering at $1.71, Americans don't yet appear moved enough to change their gas-guzzling ways. Dan?
John Roberts at the White House. As a people, we're also guzzling electricity at rates never seen before. And those in charge of the nation's power grids are anything but confident about being able to keep up with demand for electricity this summer. CBS's Jim Axelrod plugs into the problems ahead.
To power company workers in New York, the end of June must seem like the dog days of August. Last night, New York City asked some big power users to switch on their own generators. The city had its third highest power demand ever.
Well, certainly when you get into a high load period, that strains the system.
America's power grid seems to have a potentially crippling case of heat stroke. Already, San Francisco had hot weather power shortages, and California, the Southwest, New York, and New England all face the threat of serious outages this summer.
They're the most in trouble. Again, I don't want to, if you're living in Chicago, I don't want you to think that you're out of the woods.
To Rich Glick of the Energy Department, it's easy. New power plant construction has cooled while the economy has overheated.
We've had economy growing at great lengths the last several years, combined with people having more access to more computers and more fax machines, and again, other technological innovations that use electricity.
Right now, New York's temperatures are in the 80s, not the 90s. So what about when summer really heats up? On a typical summer day, Americans use a minimum of 700,000 megawatts of power. The most America's power plants could possibly generate is 780,000. Not much of a cushion.
You are really setting yourself up for a utility disaster.
John Koifman studies power shortages, and he says the answer is not just making more power.
Approaching this simply by building more power plants is like trying to fix a traffic jam by building a new automobile plant. You're going to be pumping more power into a system that is already overloaded and congested and suffering years of underinvestment.
With warmer than average summer weather predicted for most of the country, that could be a national forecast for trouble. Jim Axelrod, CBS News, New York.
The House could vote final passage this week for a Republican-backed bill strongly supported by American farmers to lift the decades-old U.S. trade embargo on food and medicine sales to Cuba. It would also allow such sales to Iran, Libya, Sudan, and North Korea. The Cuba embargo was imposed during the Cold War in hopes of undermining support for Fidel Castro. By this time tomorrow, Castro could be welcoming home one of his most famous young citizens, 6-year-old Elian Gonzalez. The lawyer for the boy's father today urged the U.S. Supreme Court to reject a final appeal by Elian's Miami relatives, clearing the way for the child and his father to leave for Cuba as early as tomorrow afternoon. CBS's Byron Pitts is in Havana. Byron?
Well, Dan, skeptical may be the best word to describe the mood here in Havana tonight. While most people here are well aware that Elian Gonzalez could be returning home to Cuba tomorrow, as one man told me, I'll believe it when I see it. We have been disappointed by the American courts before. Meantime, Elian and his father attended a prayer service in Washington, D.C. today. Most legal analysts believe the U.S. Supreme Court will rule in favor of Elian's father, clearing the way for a speedy return to Cuba as early as tomorrow afternoon. When it happens, if it happens, Fidel Castro will be waiting at the airport. Dan?
Byron Pitts in Havana. Next on the CBS Evening News, storm warning. The government says thousands of coastal homes will fall victim to seaside erosion. And later, eye surgery at the speed of light. Eye on America investigates the risk. The government warned today that soil erosion is laying the foundation for disaster for thousands of homes on the U.S. East, Gulf, and Pacific coasts and the Great Lakes. This report says up to a quarter of buildings close to shore will go slip-sliding away into the surf. CBS's Maureen Maher has the gripping facts on the CBS Weather Watch.
Every year, hundreds of miles of the U.S. coastline is washed away, and with it, more than 1,000 homes. Now, a new government study indicates it's only going to get worse.
The results are in many ways far more alarming than we even thought.
That's no surprise to anyone who lives along the Gulf Coast in Galveston, Texas, which loses more than 6 feet of shoreline every year, mostly due to pounding tropical storms like Francis in 1998.
We lost in some areas as much as 60 to 70 foot.
Galveston is still recovering, spending millions to rebuild its beaches with man-made, synthetically reinforced dunes. But who pays and how much is part of the problem. Here in Texas, the state has spent nearly $2 million to reinforce this 3.5-mile stretch along the Gulf Coast. But just down the beach, there are some who aren't being allowed to spend even a dime to save their own homes.
The grass was up level with the top of the slab.
Jane Ebram is locked in a legal battle with the state of Texas, which won't allow her to rebuild a protective bulkhead around her Galveston beach home that was washed out.
I would not mind spending the money to put a new bulkhead. I would much rather do that than move the house or lose it.
More than likely, she will lose it because the state claims too much beach is already washed away to save it. According to the 5-year study, over the next 60 years, eroding coastline will wipe out 1 out of every 4 homes within 500 feet of the shore at a cost of $530 million a year. A slippery slope the government says lands in the pocket of every taxpayer.
If you're a water person, you simply can't get close enough to the water. And it's worth the risk. It's worth the risk.
It's a risk that a little over half the population of this country appears to be able to live with. Maureen Maher, CBS News, Galveston, Texas.
A highway safety group issued a study indicating that up to half of all highway accidents, in its opinion, are caused by distracted drivers. Distractions of all kinds, including drivers talking to passengers, using cell phones, or eating or drinking while behind the wheel. Tonight's Eye on America is a hard news investigation into the risks of laser eye surgery, the popular, fast-growing, and heavily advertised quick fix for vision problems. There were 846,000 laser eye operations nationwide last year. This year, that number is projected at 1.5 million, a 76% jump. But as CBS's John Blackstone found, public demand and visions of fat profits for surgeons can bring trouble in the blink of an eye.
On San Francisco's busy California street, some people couldn't believe their eyes.
Oh, man!
Right there, in a sidewalk window, patients were having laser surgery, the kind that's supposed to fix their vision and let them throw away their glasses.
See the world in a whole new way.
It's one way to get attention in a fast-growing business marked by advertising and infomercials, by price cutting and competition, putting physicians on a road that worries eye surgeon Dr. Dave Edmiston.
Money, marketing, and medicine. It's a bad intersection.
And the money can be huge. Some surgeons charging up to $5,000 a patient have been operating on 20 a day. The math, says Dr. Edmiston, tells a worrying story.
Nobody is worth $100,000 a day. Hey, it's obscene.
The most popular method, called LASIK, takes only a few minutes. First, a flap is cut in the cornea. Then, a few bursts of a laser beam reshape the eye. It's so quick, patients and profits can mount by the hour.
We're in and out of there just like cattle.
When Cherie Wong went to a clinic in San Francisco called LaserView, she says it seemed like an assembly line.
There were about 20 people waiting to have their surgical procedure done.
By the same surgeon?
By the same surgeon.
LaserView was in such a hurry, Wong says, the operation started before the local anesthetic numbed her eyes.
So you felt this blade begin to cut your cornea?
Oh, it was awful. It was so swift. You could feel it was a razor blade just slicing over your eyeball, just slicing it.
Now, Cherie Wong has joined a class action suit accusing LaserView of taking another dangerous shortcut. In as many as 4 patients in a row, surgeons reuse the blade that cuts the cornea without changing the blade or sterilizing the equipment. LaserView says it's now stopped reusing blades and says there's no evidence anybody got a disease.
Who would want to risk getting AIDS? Who would want to risk getting hepatitis?
Dr. Peter Brett, a cancer specialist who joined the class action suit, had successful surgery at LaserView, but wonders why surgeons would ignore basic precautions.
The only thing I can think about would be greed and money.
And in this big money industry, surgeons themselves warn that patients can't always expect to come out with 20/20 vision. Dr. William Ellis runs his own eye care clinic.
You know, it's buyer beware with all these procedures.
Tomorrow, what buyers should know when they shop for the miracle of sight. In San Francisco, John Blackstone for Eye in America.
Coming up on the CBS Evening News, surprise, call it scary, Old England. Crime rates there have soared. The State Department today warned Americans going abroad this summer to be careful. Officials say the warning is routine, but it does mention August 7th, the second anniversary of the bombings of 2 U.S. embassies in East Africa. This summer, thousands of Americans will travel to Britain, expecting a civilized island free from crime and ugliness. And in many ways, it is that. But now, like the U.S., the U.K. has a crime problem. And believe it or not, except for murder, theirs is worse than ours. CBS's Tom Fenton is on assignment in London tonight.
At first sight, England is a green and pleasant land. But in reality, it is one of the most violent urban societies in the Western world. The violence of British soccer fans is the most familiar, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. The streets and shopping malls of Britain are a battleground.
I'll hurt you. I'll hurt you.
Believe it or not, your chances of being assaulted, or robbed or burgled for that matter, are substantially greater here in England and Wales than in the United States.
1-3, cancel any further units.
Police crime statistics are a sham. Only 1 in 4 assaults ever gets recorded here. But the latest government study shows that violent crime is on the rise in Britain, while in America it has been going down for 20 years. You are more likely to be burglarized here, almost twice as likely to be robbed, and 2.5 times more likely to be assaulted. 86-year-old Irene Coles is a typical victim.
I'm really lucky to be here.
She almost died of a skull fracture after being mugged right on her doorstep.
The police told me then, this is the 6th time he'd just come out of jail doing 6 years, doing the same thing.
A serial mugger, jailed many times, but never for long. Experts say that's why crime is getting worse here.
I think that the deterrence is, especially since the 3 strikes and you're out legislation in the US, has been much greater in the US than it has been here.
Dr. John Shepard is used to patching up people slashed with bottles and injured in bar fights. That's bad enough, he says, but if guns are added to the mix, it would be much worse.
It would be mayhem.
Mayhem is on the way. This year, there have already been hundreds of shootings in British cities, dozens in London alone, 3 of them in one evening recently. So increasingly guns are appearing in Britain, and that means more crime and violence could be just around the corner of one of these genteel British streets. On assignment in London, I'm Tom Fenton.
Next year on CBS, the AIDS explosion in Africa and the pastor from half a world away with a bold message for stopping it. On the CBS Health Watch, the United Nations reports tonight that in the AIDS epidemic, the worst is yet to come. And the worst of all is in Africa, especially countries south of the Sahara Desert. The UN projects half of today's teenagers in 4 nations in southern Africa will die of AIDS. In the nation of South Africa, it now has the world's highest infection rate. Help is in short supply. But as CBS's Thalia Ashuris reports, some are trying, even half a world away.
If you play, you pay.
Reverend Eugene Rivers is a force of unity, bringing together police, church, and community leaders in a crusade against Boston's violent street gangs. But this is a pastor on another crusade, against a different enemy on a different continent, fighting AIDS in Africa.
This is the Holocaust for the black world.
Almost 14 million Africans have died of the disease, and by next year, an estimated 13 million children will be orphaned by AIDS. In Africa, the virus is spread primarily by heterosexual sex, and Rivers has a controversial view on that. He blames African men.
Sexual promiscuity now functions as a weapon of mass destruction in African society. And the most difficult thing for black leadership in this country and abroad to talk about is the issue of behavior.
But Rivers talks about it in South Africa on a TV talk show.
There needs to be a spiritual and cultural revolution in the black world.
And back home in the United States.
Black leadership and African leadership should be promoting abstinence, monogamy, and contraception.
But that's easier said than done. The biggest concern is how to fund the education and medical care needed, especially since the African nations are among the poorest in the world. In January, Vice President Al Gore announced an additional $100 million in the U.S. commitment to fighting AIDS overseas, bringing the total to $325 million annually.
They're crumbs, and everybody knows it. We know that Colombia, one country, got $1.7 billion to fight a drug war they're never going to win.
Rivers will continue to clamor for more aid and more action by African American leaders in a mission critical to the survival of a continent. Thalia Assuras, CBS News, Boston.
Tonight, a special 60 Minutes 2. Ed Bradley does a terrific reporting job and gives you an in-depth look at Africa's spiraling AIDS epidemic and why you should care about it. Death by Denial, an hour-long 60 Minutes 2 special, begins at 9/8 Central Time. For CBS News, Dan Rather reporting. Good night.
For news 24 hours a day, CBS.com on the internet and on our interactive partner, America Online, at keyword CBS News.
This is CBS.